One of the earliest references to the term sash is in the 1590s and refers to a strip of silk, fine linen or gauze wound around the head like a turban. It comes from the Arabic word shash or muslin cloth. In the mid-16th century, waist and shoulder sashes began to be used to signify higher military ranks or to show allegiance to a particular political party or nation. By the end of the 17th century, commissioned officers in the British Army wore sashes of crimson silk. These sashes were 6 inches wide by 88 inches long with a 10-inch gold or silver colored fringe. To accommodate the long length, the sash was worn over the right shoulder to the left hip and then wrapped around the waist. These sashes also served a functional purpose, as they were large enough to form a hammock stretcher to carry the officer if he were to be wounded. Many modern militaries still wear sashes as part of their formal uniform attire. George Washington, who served as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War and later as the first President of the United States, was noted for wearing a blue ribbed sash early in the war. In 1775, with the Continental Army lacking formal uniforms, he ordered the use of green, pink, and blue sashes to identify high ranks and roles within the Army. Towards the end of the war, Washington's attitude towards sashes changed. As historians report, he called them unrepublican and pretentious for all but the highest-ranking aristocracy. Sashes continued to be used by the United States Army until 1917, when they were removed from the official full-dress uniform. Today, waist sashes and sabers are worn by NCOs and officers of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, and cadets at West Point. In 1924, the BSA introduced the Merit Badge Sash for use at the World Jamboree, and today we're going to talk with Tim Brown about the use of the sash in the Order of the Arrow in this edition of Artifact of the Week. Tim, thanks for taking some time to talk to us. Today we're going to look at the OA Sash. Tell us a little bit about the history of the sash and how it's developed over time.
Well, from the earliest days, the initial ceremonies in 1915 at Treasure Island, we have stories from Dr. Goodman and Carol Edson, the founders, as well as the first Enemy Lodge chief, George Chapman. They all describe the use of a sash in the original ceremonies. Nobody really knows the exact shape, if it had an arrow, what the color was. A lot of people depict it as being a black sash with a white bar or a white arrow so it would stand out during the night. But it seemed like all three of them had different recollections of what the initial sash was used in the ceremony. So we've been using sashes really to designate members of the Order of the Arrow, or initially called the Wamakinding, ever since the beginning.
So what was the first sash that we would recognize today? Where did it come from? What did it look like?
I would think it probably would have been in the late teens to early 20s. A lot of lodges started making their own sashes. They had different shaped arrows, different size fletchings, different materials even. A lot of them were felt, but some of them almost had like a seatbelt type of material, a very stiff woven canvas. But nationally, they started producing sashes, and we have some here in this case, of course, that the BSA or the Arrow started producing sashes. And the one we recognize today is a single red felt arrow sewn on top of a white sash. And that started as early as the mid-20s and continued to be used until about the mid-40s, that's the sash. And there's some varieties of them, of course.
Now, I know there was a change in the direction that the arrow was over your shoulder, whether it was the left shoulder or the right shoulder. What was that all about, and how did that change?
Well, that same arrow I was talking about, that same sash, it was worn two different ways. It was pointed over the right shoulder if you were an ordeal member, and when you attained brotherhood honor, they had you flip it the other way, pointing over the left shoulder. But as we entered into the 1950s, there was this, what they called the Red Scare of communism, and people were considered leftists and all, so they didn't want anything pointing over the left shoulder. So they actually added bars, top and bottom, to designate it as a brotherhood sash, and it was pointing the same shoulder, over the same shoulder as the ordeal. And so that's about the time that changed, was around 1950.
And what about the vigil sash? It hasn't always been the way it looks today. How did that sort of evolve into what we know as the vigil sash?
That's correct. Dr. Goodman, of course, was our first vigil honor member with the Indian name Nwingi, the willing. but he didn't wear a sash or a designation of a vigil for a long time as we know it. But they finally came out with the triangle that had arrows in the circular pattern there. And that was typically on just the white sash. The very first ones were what they called the no arrow vigil, which we also have here in the case. And it's just the triangle with the arrow superimposed on it with no arrow. And those started as early as the mid-1920s, and I think they probably went up to the early 1930s. After that, they started doing different things. They put them over top of an arrow, of course. Some of them were felt on felt on felt, little white felt arrows on a red triangle, felt triangle on a white felt sash, so it's felt on felt on felt. Some of the arrows were chain stitched, embroidered instead of being felt arrows. So it's changed through the years, and eventually morphed into a flocking type of manufacturing, which it looked like a silk screen. And then now, of course, it's all embroidered. So it's been a huge evolution over the last 100 years, actually, of the sash.
Has the sash ever not been a part of the OA?
Yes, I would think in the very early days they didn't have a sash. I don't know when they actually started, and I'm not sure there's literature or any documentation when the first sashes were used, but people were traditionally identified as members of the Order of the Arrow by their totem or their totem pins of something. Sometimes they had neckerchief slides and different things that represented their totem, but sashes started coming in vogue in the 20s, and pretty much ever since the 20s, for the last 100 years, Order of the Arrow members are designated by the sash.
Now, there's a couple of things about sashes that are out there, and people do them right, wrong, or indifferent. One of them are autographs on sashes of lodge chiefs, of national chiefs, of the founders when they were alive. And the other one is the legend.
Yeah.
How do those two fit, those kind of things fit into the...
Well, according to the standards for use and wear of the sash, you're not supposed to put anything really on it, with the exception of a couple things, and I'll mention those in a second. But a lot of people traditionally collect signatures on sashes. Dr. Goodman promoted that. It's pretty hard, even if it says not to do anything with the sash other than wear it. If Dr. Goodman is autographing it, it's probably got the okay to continue to do that. But beaded legends and stuff were also something that were put on there that traditionally were not. The things that are allowed to be worn on the sash were the 50th Anniversary Award, which came out in 1965 at the National Conference. It's a little square that you would wear above the bar. In 1975, for the 60th anniversary, they did kind of a hexagon-shaped patch as well. For the 75th anniversary, they did not create anything for the sash, but they did have a little dangle that you would wear on your pocket that had the turtle and the arrow and the 75. But then for the centennial, they created another patch that you could wear in a certain location on the sash. And you can wear multiples. If you earn one as a youth, you could wear the one. If you earned it as an adult, you could wear both of them in certain positions.
All right, Tim, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Some other common and popular places you can find sashes include college and high school graduation ceremonies to recognize the winners of pageants and contests, as part of a country's formal diplomatic apparel, and by the presidents of many countries around the world, particularly in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. By the way, that little cloth belt used to tie your bathrobe closed is also technically a sash. Just thought you should know. That's all the time we have for this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of the BSA through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.